All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about associations in Django and the Django server. So in part one, we'll be going over creating a multiple apps. We'll be creating a move app so that each one of our Pokemons can actually have Pokemon moves. This will go through the process of creating an app, creating a model, validating data, making migrations, testing said model, and then serializing the data. It's quite a bit. Unfortunately, due to the time constraints, we'll likely just go over the steps on a surface level. Um, but we've already covered all of this material. It should be review at this point. And then here's going to be the meat and potatoes of what we'll talk about. We're going to be actually diving into relationships. We'll have one-to-one relationships and how in Django they're referenced to as one-to-one. We'll have the many-to-one and how that works in Django, which is a foreign key. And then we'll have a many-to-many. And we'll cover what happened to the junction table that's working within many-to-many relationships. And then after that, we'll talk about how to serialize data within nested relationships. In part two, we'll talk about the Django server, what it is that the command run server does, how URL patterns and function-based API views work, and we'll actually create some function-based API views that will work with this URL patterns. We'll then talk about how requests are being handled by the server, and then finally we'll talk about URL parameters in Django, and we'll build a dynamic API view, a dynamic API function-based view that will handle those set parameters and return a response. You can see that we're mainly going to be messing with area. So we have the area of a square, area of a circle, and area of a triangle. All right, at this point, does anyone have any questions over what we'll be covering today? All right, if no one has any questions, let's go ahead and move into our first topic, which is going to be creating this move app. So we've gone over these steps before. I want to create a new model. This model is going to be a move that my Pokemon will have a many-to-many relationship with. We won't worry about the relationship just yet. Let's worry about creating our model first. What would be the process for creating an app, writing this model, validating the data, and going down the line? What's the first command that I need to run? And we're going to require some classroom participation here. So let's get this moving. What's the first thing we need?
You're going to set up your environment.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I have an environment and it has been activated, but yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Nathan. What's next? Tom?
Would you want to run the Django admin start app move app?
Okay, so I'm going to run Python manage
Oh,
PY. I'm in the wrong directory. All right, and then I want to start app, move app. All right, so now I have a new directory called move app. Go ahead, Kara.
You're going to want to add move app to your installed apps in your settings file.
Right, so there I am in my settings and I'm adding move app into my installed apps. Good, what's next? Go ahead, Adrian.
Would we move into creating the model?
All right, so we're moving into the model and we're gonna go ahead and create a model for our move. Now this part I'm gonna quickly glance over. I'm gonna make a class named move, which is going to take models.model. Oh, we're not there yet. Jesus. All right, there it is. Perfect. All right, so there's my models.model, and now I'm gonna go ahead and give it a couple of fields. We want to make sure that we have the name of a move. We want to make sure we have the accuracy of a move or the ability of how often this should hit. We're gonna go ahead and carry something like PP, which I believe that's how many times a move can be used within Pokemon. And then finally, we'll have the amount of power that each move should have. Great. So there we have our class move and a couple of fields that we've created. But what should be corresponding to this name variable here? What kind of field do I want to correlate to name? All right. Okay, perfect. We have a models.char field. And I'm gonna go ahead and give that a max length of maybe 150. And we'll go over validators here shortly after. What about accuracy?
Probably an integer field.
Awesome. Let's go integer field. Our integer field, that should work for now. All right. What about for our PP there?
Also an integer field.
Perfect. Let's turn that into an integer field. And then finally, we have our power, which will likely also be an integer field. All right. So now we've created our model. We could definitely add a dunder method that will represent each one of these moves. So let's do that real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and create a dunder method. That's going to take in self as an argument, and it's going to return an f string that will represent name for self.name. And let's do power or self.power. Okay, so there's the class move that takes in a dunder method, but now we need to start adding some validation into these fields. Currently, somebody could enter negative numbers into my accuracy, my power, and the actual power. Well, not only that, I want some sort of limiters, right? We don't want somebody to be able to use the same move 100 times. I think the max that you could use is like 20 or 30. And then for power, we also don't want this to get way too out of hand. So let's start. I apologize, everyone. Let's start bringing in some validators here from Django core. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the top of my file. I'm going to say from Django.core import validators as v. All right. So let's go ahead and say that I don't want to accept blank here. So I'm going to go ahead and say blank is equal to false. I also don't want to accept null. So I'm going to make that equal to false as well. For my accuracy, I'm going to make validators be equal to a list. And I'm going to grab my min value validator, saying that the very minimum would be 0. I guess 1 would be the minimum, right? We don't want it to be that difficult. And then min value validator. Oh, I apologize. This should be max. Which would be 100. All right. Then we have our PowerPoint. Again, we'll pass in the validators argument, which will take in a min value of 1. Or actually, this one can actually run out, so we'll want that to be 0. And then we have our max value validator, which should be somewhere around the lines of 30. And finally, our validators for power, which in power, we could have something that will be something like a v.max value validator, which will only take in maybe 120. I think it's the highest. And our min value validator would be something along the lines of 10. All right, so now we've just built a move model, where this move model takes in a name, some accuracy, some power, and the amount of times that it can utilize this one move. We've also added a dunder method to it. What else could we do to this move model to ensure that we're receiving data and enforcing the data that we're receiving?
You could specify for the accuracy, PP, and power that they shouldn't be blank or null, same if you have the name.
Perfect. Yeah, let's do that. I'm gonna go ahead and specify both arguments for both PP and power. All right, so now I have blank is false. What else, Brian?
Are blank equals false and null equals false? Aren't those automatically set unless you set them to true? I thought those were kind of implied.
Um, I have to double check, but I think true is what's implied. Blank equals true and null equals true is what's implied, but I may be wrong. I'll have to double check and then get back to you. All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and actually create a validator for this name function as well to make sure that it's falling inside a specific format. Let's see what format we want this move to be in. I guess we would want it to be in title format as well, but it could accept spaces in this case. Probably just one space, right? Because if I think about wing attack, I know that there's a space between both of those, and they're both in title format. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So we have all this information. How do I go about creating a custom serializer? Go ahead, Adrian.
You make a, I guess it would be a directory, so you make a file for it.
Okay, so I go into move app and I make a file named serializers.py.
Then I think you import from Django core the serializer. Might be wrong, not sure.
Yeah, that's really close. So we're gonna import the validation error. Nice. I also want to import RE. Okay, thank you so much, Mike, for sending that on the chat. All right, so there we have it in Django core exceptions. We have our validation error, and we have our RE for our regex so that we can match it. Let's just make a function named validate move name. It's gonna take in a name as an argument, and I'm gonna go ahead and start making my regex. Go ahead, David.
Are we doing serializers or validators here?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, these are serializers. I messed that all up.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Let's go ahead and start with the serializer then. Let's do from REST framework dot serializers import model serializer. All right. David, is your hand up because you're ready to help me out with this one? Oh,
No, but I can give it a shot.
let's do it.
Yeah, so models import, what does it move? And then you're gonna do class move serializer in parentheses serializers dot model serializer.
All right.
Yep, and then class meta model is going to be equal to move. And then for fields, I would just do a list with a quotation dunder all.
Got it. I think you don't need the list on the parent level if you're doing the all method. But yeah, this is great. Awesome. So now I have all of everything that's coming from my model. Go ahead, Lewis.
I just had a quick question about serializers. Because we have model serializer here in the parentheses for the class, isn't it normally serializers dot model serializer? And if it's not, like, what's the difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you can see here on my import statement on line 1, I'm saying from REST framework dot serializers import model serializer. So think about REST framework being a directory, a Python directory, and serializers is a file. that lives inside of REST framework. And then this model serializer is a class that lives inside of this serializers file. So if I were to do something like from REST framework import serializers, I'm importing the file, but what I need is the class. So I would have to specify serializers dot model serializer, which is the class that lives inside of this file. Does that answer your
That
question?
makes, it does, yeah, thank you. So you're not actually changing what you're importing between those two methods.
That's
Is that correct? Okay.
Well, no, sorry, I apologize. That's wrong. So when I'm importing here, if I import the entire script, that means I'm importing everything in the script. Any other serializer class or every other class that lives inside of this file is being imported as soon as I use this class or this file gets referenced or this class is referenced with any other's import statement. I'm grabbing that entire file. So to minimize everything that I'm grabbing, I usually do REST framework.serializers and I import only what I need to avoid running into naming convention problems or because if there's something inside of this file that shares the same name as something that I can create, I can run into some unexpected problems. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. All right. So there we have our class. We have all of our moves. We created our serializer. And now we could actually go into our validators. Let's go ahead and inside of move app, make some validators.py. Let's code those validators. All right, and inside of this validator, I can go ahead and actually write what I was writing before, where I import from Django.core exceptions, import validation error, and I can import RE. Then I can make my function, which is validate move name. That takes in an argument of name. And there I just want to create an error message, then a regex, and what it is that I want to return. Well, let's go ahead and do the regex first. The regex that I want to create, I'm going to specify with R that this is a regex string. Here's the beginning of my string. I want A through Z. And I only want alphabetic numbers here. I want one or more matches. And I remember this from yesterday where DJ was talking about regex, and that plus sign means that it allows for one or more matches and it doesn't accept 0, which is what the star would do. And then for my second, again, I would want A through Z, followed by A through Z with one or more matches, and I could show that this is now the end of the string. All right, so now I've built out my regex. I can go into creating whether it's a good match or not. So good name, and I'm gonna make that to re.match. I'm going to pass in the regex that I'll be utilizing, and I'll be passing in the name that I'm comparing it to. And then afterwards, I'll just say if not good name, I want to raise a validation error where the error message will be move name has the wrong format. And if that is not triggered, then I'll just return good name. All right. So there's my validator. I can finally import said validator here. I can say from dot validators import validate move name. And I could add that into my name field by saying validators, creating my list, and calling the validate move name. Go ahead, Edge.
I got it. Can you go back to the validators quick?
Of course.
You put return good name. Would we not want to return the actual name?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's right. Syntax error. Go ahead, DJ.
That was my question, because good name is going to be a match object, so you'd have to access the elements of the object to get that. So thanks, Edge.
Awesome. All right, so we just did quite a bit. Before we move on into anything else, I want to make sure that we're understanding what's going on. And go ahead, Jens.
Just a difference from yesterday that I'm noticing now, but in the raised validation error, what was the significance yesterday of doing the primes name equals or name equals name?
It gives this error a field within parameters that you can access if you want to figure out where exactly this is running. It's essentially just giving it more information that you can access through the validation error in the
Okay.
message dictionary.
So that second argument isn't necessary. It's just for debugging purposes.
That's correct. That would be that was an optional parameter that you can pass.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. All right. So let's do a quick overview over what we've done so far. So starting from the very top here, we created an app named MoveApp, which generated this application here. We then went into our Pokemon project inside of settings.py, looked at our installed apps, and added the MoveApp so that when I execute anything that has to do with my project, it knows that this is an app that it can reference. From there, we went into our MoveApp, accessed the models file, and in models, we created a move model that has four fields, one for name, accuracy, PP, which I need to figure out what that stands for, and power. We've added some of built-in validators for min and max values for accuracy, PP, and power. And for our move, we've actually added another validator named validate move name, which is a custom validator that we created ourselves that runs upon our regex and that ensures that it matches the format that we desire all of our moves to have. Then we went into our tests. Then we created a serializer for set data. This data utilizes the serializer from Rest framework, where the model is move and the fields to be utilized by said model are all. Does anyone have any questions regarding what we've done so far as creating another app, creating a model, adding validation, and creating a serializer for serializing said data? Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could just describe what the serializer is doing a little bit more. Like I get how using the validators with the models is working, but I'm not sure exactly what the serializer is doing. And I understand how we've used it within the shell, but outside of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So everything that we've been doing within the shell are eventually going to turn into the bodies of our API views and the things that respond to HTTP requests. Where the serializer comes in is it grabs data from our database, or when we grab data from our database, we receive it as a query set, which is something that we can't send over HTTP responses. So in order to grab that data and efficiently turn it into something that's JSON readable or something that could be in JSON format, we utilize the serializers to turn our query sets into JSON data. Does that answer your question, David?
Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Of course. Go ahead, so.
Yeah, I was just wondering, did we need to insert the REST framework inside of our installed apps under settings, or did we already do that?
That's we had this is still the same project from yesterday, so we had REST framework inside of our installed apps from yesterday.
Awesome, thank you.
Of course. Go ahead, Landon.
Could you just quickly explain like the file structure again, like project versus the app kind of thing, or the relationship between the two?
Oh, like as far as how they relate to each other and how they talk to each other?
Yeah, because you have one called Poke API _ project, and then we have a move app. And I'm guessing this is trying to follow the single responsibility principle, but just like how underscore app versus underscore project versus, yeah, all kind of relate.
Yeah, definitely. So our Pokey, a project can have many apps inside of it. And just like Landon mentioned, essentially what we want each individual app to do is to relate to one model. So far, we've covered serializers and validation. And once we start going into API views and converters, we can see how this application can get a little bit out of hand. And that's why it's important to try to centralize all information belonging to one model inside of one app. But how do these apps speak to each other, or how do they speak to the project? Well, a project is always going to run regardless whether we have an application for it or not, right? Essentially, we could write all of these apps within the one project and just connect them to the URLs if we really wanted to, which we could see later on. But because we don't want that, and we want to follow a good folder structure so that other developers can also work within individual apps and make changes without breaking everything else, we want to divide all of our work into their independent apps. Well, from there, our Pokemon project needs to know how to talk to these apps. So in settings.py, under installed apps, we need to tell it, hey, these are the apps that you have to reference to. We'll go over how our project receives requests and sends those requests to individual apps during part 2 of our lecture. But this is what we have covered up to this point. Does that answer your question, Landon?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Of course. Go ahead, Lewis.
This is more, I understand for serializers how Dunderdall would help us out here in this sense, because obviously we're going to want all of the data. But specifically yesterday, when we do testing and we use Dunderdall, if we want to return everything, it also includes the ID that we don't have to like specifically mention in our models. When you use Dunderdall, is there a way to like intentionally exclude like a specific, like if you just don't want one piece of information, is there a way to specifically exclude that one piece?
Yeah, there is actually. If you wanted to do something like that where you don't have the ID in your serializers, rather than utilizing fields all, you could do something that would say excludes. And this takes a list, and then you could just say ID in there. And then it'll return everything except for what's inside of excludes.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Of course, no problem. Go ahead. I think that's my bad. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate real quick. So that the serializer, could we think of it as like, I think it basically does the same thing as in, remember if it was JavaScript or TypeScript I used before, and they had basically this layout to like basically stringify or JSONify stuff, like depending if it's coming in or going out to the web. Is that basically what we're doing here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, that's essentially what our serializer is going to do. Is it's going to make our query set data into something that's actually JSON readable. But it's also allowing Python to work with that data if we want to format it a little bit. So it's giving us both functionalities at once. Does that answer your question, Michael?
Absolutely, yeah. That helped me a lot because I'm like, oh, I have something to relate it to. But the other thing you said that the project communicates to each of the applications through the settings PY when we add it to the apps list. Was that it? I think that's all it was, right? Yeah, okay, cool. Thanks. That's all. Thank you.
Of course. All right. We've gone over quite a bit now. We have our models, but our model doesn't actually exist within our database just yet. If I take a look at my migrations folder, all I have is a init.py in there. That means that I haven't made any actual migration files, right? And typically most frameworks will have you make those migration files yourselves by hand. So that's one of the other biggest benefits about Django is Django knows we're going to need that, and it has a way to generate those files for us. But how do I generate those files and actually run them against my database? Go ahead, Chris.
Would it just be the command python manage.py make migrations?
All right, awesome. So when I run this command python manage.py make migrations, this is going to then reference to the model, right? So manage py will reference to the model, and here we can see where it's looking. It will go into pokeapi.settings. So here we have my settings, and it'll look at all the installed apps. After it looks at the installed apps, it's going to look at each individual model, and it's going to identify, hey, does this model look different than what I've seen before? If it does, we need to create a migration file for it. And if it doesn't, then there's nothing we need to do. We could just say, hey, there's no migrations to be applied. Well, in this case, it's going to look at our move app, and it's going to look at the model file, and it's going to see this wasn't here before. According to migrations, the migrations folder, this doesn't exist and this wasn't here before, which means we need to create a migration file for it. So now when I run this command, it looks at my settings, and here we can see it identified, hey, inside of move app, there's a model that wasn't there before. So we're going to create a migration file for it, 001, which is going to create the model move. So now that I have a migration file, it creates my model of move. We can see that it has my ID, name, PowerPoint, and power with their individual constraints. And it tells me, hey, this is the initial one. This is true. Well, now this hasn't been applied into my database because I need this migration file in order for PsychoPG to turn this file into an actual SQL command of create table, where the table will be named move, and the fields that this table will have will be ID, name, accuracy, PP, power, with the following constraints. So now I can say Python manage py migrate, and it will apply my migration into my database. Does anyone have any questions over that workflow? How Django turns our models into migration files, and how our migration files run through PsychoPG into SQL and churn into SQL commands. Go ahead, Jose.
Does migrating check for methods that are created within or only for fields?
For methods that are creating, you're referencing to, for example, the dunder method here?
Right.
That's a great question. Yeah, migrations will concentrate with fields. It will not take into consideration our methods. If for whatever reason you try to make a migration and it says there's an error in this file and it references a line where your method exists, that's just saying this script can't be executed. That means that at some point there was a problem with the script in the way that it was formatted or the way that the script was made, but it does not actually check each individual method to ensure that it's valid. Does that answer your question, Jose?
Yep, thank you.
Of course. All right, awesome. So we just made a new move app. This move app has my model. It has some serializers and some validators made for it. We could write some tests here, but in the interest of time, we're going to leave our testing portion for the end of the lecture, and we're going to actually move into talking about some associations. So let's take a look at some Django associations in Django ORM. So here's our types of associations. We've covered this during constraints and the importance of associations. We want models to be able to relate to one another, right? If each individual model is the same thing as a table, and each table or each class is supposed to represent one object, I wouldn't want the entire passport data to be inside of the same information as one human. Because if I change something in the passport, well, then I would have to change the entire person overall in order to be able to access that information. Each individual one should be independent from their objects, but they should have a way to connect and talk to each other. Well, in this case, we have a one-to-one relationship where one person should only have one passport. All right, so there we can see an example of the actual syntax down below. We can see the owner model to a one-to-one field relationship, which is for traveler. And although this is an overarching concept, it's important that we actually see the code as well. So let's actually go into creating this code. I've already created a project for our relationships, so we don't have to worry about it. And I have it running within a specific database already. We have this relationships project. And in this relationships project, we can see that we have 3 apps, each one representing one relationship. So let's go into our model here. We have my Django models, where I can have one profile for one person. So let's go ahead and create that class for person. This is going to be models.model. Oh. And let's just give it a name. I'm not going to go through the entire process of giving it validators and everything else that we can possibly give it. Instead, I'm just going to give it a name, right? So there we have our name, and why not? Let's give it an age. Models.positive integer fields. All right. Now let's make the profile. Same thing, we have our models.model. And this model for this profile can have something like a bio, which is a models.text field. What else could this profile have? Maybe this profile has something like friends, or it may have a couple of other things. Maybe we also need them to use a username. All right. So now I've created these 2 entities, but how do they talk to each other? Well, let's make migrations. So Python manage py, make migrations. And I spelled that wrong. Okay, so there we see we made some migrations for creating a person and a profile. And now we migrate it, and we can see that it's within SQL now. Well, let's take a look at that. Let me go ahead and check what this database is called. Okay, relate DB. All right. So now I have my migration applied. If I run D to see my relationships, I can see that I have this person and this profile that have been created. So let's go ahead and run a query here. Where I can see a person. And I can see a profile. So both of them have been created. But nothing's actually connecting them just yet. Well, let's connect this profile to a person. What we're going to do here is we're going to make a person be equal to models dot one-to-one field. And this one-to-one field takes a couple of things. So this one-to-one field. Okay. So here it tells you exactly how it builds it within SQL. It tells you that it works almost like a foreign key relationship, but it utilizes unique. And here's my init method, which takes in on delete and to. These are the two two of the arguments that we're gonna concentrate on. So let's go into my models. What I wanted to relate to is the model person. And then I have to specify, well, what is it that I wanted to do if this person is deleted? All right, so I'm going to say on delete, I want models dot cascade. So that means if this person is deleted, I want my profile to also be deleted for said person. All right. And then I also need my person to have a way to relate to this profile. And let's do that real quick. We're going to do related underscore name be equal to profile. And what that does is essentially creating an imaginary field for this person named profile that is going to equal to the profile class. This field here on line 9 is not managed through Postgres. Python or Django is what's actually creating this extra field and managing that related name relationship. All right, so let's take a look and make sure that this works. Let's do make migrations. Let's see, what are you complaining about? It is impossible to add a nullable valid field person to provide it without specific default value. This is because the database needs something to populate existing rows. Well, I don't have any existing rows. All right, so it looks like this is throwing an error on my one-to-one field due to the fact that I've already made migrations. So there's a good example of something that I can show here. So what I'm gonna actually do is I'm gonna drop my entire database. And then from there, I am going to drop my migration files so that we can remake this entire migration process. So I'm gonna drop database relate DB. I'm going to create my database again, relate DB. And from there, I'm just going to delete this migrations folder, the entire folder. Now, typically that would cause a problem, and I could understand if somebody, why we would get the freak out here happening. But Django is very powerful, and it knows that if there's a migrations folder that is gone, it just needs to simply recreate it because it needs a way to store this migration files. So I'm going to specify make migrations again. Well, when I run just make migrations, it says there's no changes detected. So I have to specify where it is that I wanted to check for migrations. So I'm going to say make migrations in 1-to-1 app. Now I ran my create. And now I can migrate all of my information again. Okay, so let's go back into pSQL. Select all from. Oh, I'm in the wrong database. Okay, so now we can see we have our ID, our bio, our username, and then we have this person ID column that has now been added. If I take a look at the person, our person has ID, name, and age. Nothing too special so far, or at least nothing that can really stick out to us. Well, let's register these apps real quick. Let's say from.models, import person, and import profile. Admin.site, register. And I want to register my profile and my person. We've already gone over this entire process. I'm going to run my server. Open up Django. I'm actually going to go into the admin site. I've already created a user. Actually, no, I haven't because I just dropped my database. So let's go through the process of creating a user. All right, I've created a user. Now I can run my server one more time. Run a refresh here. Let's do FR and my password. All right, perfect. Here we can see we have my persons and my profiles. Well, if I try to create a profile here, it's going to say, hey, you need a person, but I don't have anyone to choose. Well, this is a fake bio. What happens if I try to save it? Well, it tells me, hey, this field is required. You need someone. I need to have a person to create this relationship. Well, all right, let me add a person first. All right, save. Let's go over to some profiles. Let's add a profile. And let's take a look at persons. So there's my person object 1. Let's make another one. I'm going to try to make another relationship to this person object 1. Well, let's see what happens. Well, when I try to save it, it tells me a profile with this person already exists. So I have my one-to-one relationship already built out there. All right, so here's my model. I have a person that has the fields name and age, my profile with a bio, username and person with a one-to-one relationship. Okay, great. Well, now let's go into our Django server. Or actually, let's go ahead and dump some data. And what I want to dump data from, oh, that might be too much. Let's actually go into the Python shell. Okay, so now I've entered my shell. And what I'm going to do within this shell is I'm going to import both of these models.
I think you misspelled one-to-one.
I did. Thank you. Okay, so there it is. So I have both of my models available. Well, I can grab my first person here. And I can grab my first profile. So now I have both of these person and profile available to me. Well, let's take a look here. I'm gonna go ahead and run person to see what that returns. Tells me it's a person object. Well, if I run person.name, it should show me Francisco. Person.age should show me the age of Francisco. But what if I want to see the profile? Let's run into person.profile. Well, now person.profile, even though it's not a field that belongs to this person, it's still returning the profile object. Well, what if I want to access an attribute? Let's say I want to see the bio. Person.profile.bio gives me the attribute of bio for the profile that belongs to this person. Same could be done vice versa. If I go into profile, I can see that I have a profile. If I go into profile.bio, it returns me the bio. And if I wanted to see the name of the person that this profile belongs to, I can say profile.person.name. And that would return Francisco. And that's how you build your one-to-one relationship. Does anyone have any questions regarding how to build a one-to-one relationship and what these commands of related name? So far, we've only seen related name. I'll cover on delete here shortly. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, so basically the one-to-one field, that has to go under the parents class or the child class?
Yeah, that's a great question. Whenever you're deciding where you should make the relationship from, think about where you would want data to be deleted from. So this is what I'm referencing to. Let me demonstrate it. So currently I have a profile on a person. If my person is deleted from my database, I would want their profile to also be deleted. But if a profile is deleted from my database, I wouldn't want the person to be deleted. Because what if the person comes back and just makes another profile? All right. So that's why I have this relationship here. Because that way, this onDelete models.cascade can be triggered if this person is gone. For example, currently, person exists and profile also exist. Well, if I run person.delete, we can see that deleted person. If I try to access person now, it's going to tell me that it's a person object of none. It doesn't exist. It's not in my database. If I try to query it here, it's going to tell me it doesn't exist. Well, what happens when I try to see my profile? Well, now my profile is gone as well. How did that happen? Well, that profile is also gone because of this onDelete models.cascade. When the person was deleted, it said, hey, we have a one-to-one relationship with profile, delete the profile as well.
Gotcha. That made sense. Thanks.
Of course. All right. Any other questions regarding one-to-one relationships? Okay, great. If there aren't any questions, let's move on into building. I don't want to move on into the next topic and then take a break halfway. Let's take a break now. It's currently 10:52. Let's come back at 11:02 and continue on with our lecture. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll see everyone back here in 10 minutes. All right, before we continue moving forward, let's do a quick overview over what we did in this model. We made a class person, which is going to be a model that ran into our database, which has two fields, name and age, which we can see here, ID, name, and age. And we have a profile, which has a bio, username, person, and we can see that as well. ID, bio, username, and person ID. We went into the admin site and created a couple of instances, and we can see how we can relate to each individual object. We can see how a person has access to the profile through the related name field. And we can see how a profile has access through person through their person field. Then we covered over how onDelete cascade works as far as deleting an actual model. There's a couple of other options that you have here for how to handle onDeletes. You could do onDelete set null if you don't want the actual move to be or the actual object to be deleted from your database. And I think there's one more other than set null that I can't recall at the top of my head. But that's typically what's happening here within a person. Well, that's great and all. And we have this information about how we made our relationships. But yesterday there was a really good question regarding serializers. We have this information, but how does it work when I want to serialize some data? Let's make a serializers.py and let's see what it looks like. We're going to grab from models. I'm going to import person and profile. And from REST framework dot serializers, I'm going to import model serializer. All right, well, let's start with the person here. Let's say class person serializer. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the profile. I'm going to give it a class meta. And I'm going to say that the name or the model that I wanted to access will be the profile. And for fields, I'm just going to return all. There's my fields. Well, let me make an actual instance and let's also make one for person. And same thing for fields. We're going to go ahead and do all. All right. I'm going to go ahead and go into the admin site to create one of each of these instances so that we can see it again. All right, I'm going to add a person here. I'm going to add a profile. I'm going to connect it to my person and save it. So now I have a profile and a person living within my database. If I query my database, I can see that there's a profile. And I can see that there's a person. Great. Well, then I should be able to access these serializers in order to grab information. Well, let's try that out. Let's say from 1 to 1 app dot serializers. Serializers. I want to import my person, the profile serializer, and the person serializer. All right, so now I've imported all of my classes that live inside of this file. So let's start using them. Let's say serialized person. We're gonna make that equal to the person serializer. And the data that it's going to have will be person.objects.first. All right, so now I can see my serialized person.data come back. Well, we can see that for the serialized person.data I have ID, the name, and age. Okay, that works, but it's not giving me my profile. Well, what about my profile? Let's see, serialized profile. Then we make that to profile serializer. That's going to take in profile.objects.first. I'm going to check the data. Well, if I check the data for my profile as well, it seems that I get a number 2. So it knows that the connection lives there, but it's only referencing it to it as 2. That's useful, but maybe I wanted to see the profile nested within my object over here. And that's something that I could make my serializer do. But how do I go about doing that or mess with relationship serializers? Well, in a one-to-one relationship, it's actually really simple. I'm referencing all here, and we can see that it grabs a person key. Well, for that person key, all I need to say for person, I want you to reference the, oh, excuse me. Let me grab this and bring it up top. Okay, we can see that in my profile, we have a person key. So for person, I could simply just say, whenever you see the key of person or the field person, I want you to utilize the person serializer to represent that data. Okay, let's take a look at what it does. Again, I'm going to run my import statements. Let me open up the Python shell so we can see it a little bit. All right, so here's all my import statements. And now I'm going to serialize my profile. I don't need to worry about my person. Now let's take a look at the data. Okay, great. So now we see a difference. we see the ID of 2, and we can see that there's a field named person. For that field named person, it actually utilized my person serializer to serialize the person that I belong to. And it shows me the bio and the username, which still belongs to my profile. All I did was give it a reference telling it, hey, for the field of person, which is what I'm doing here on line 11, I want you to utilize the person serializer, which was created right above. I can't have these two inverted, because if I have these two inverted, then person serializer doesn't exist, right? If I take this off and I do it this way, we'll get a squiggly line telling me, hey, person serializer doesn't exist and it is not defined. And there it is. That is how you utilize serializers with nested, or sorry, not with nested, with associations. Does anyone have any questions over connecting associated data through serializers? Go ahead, Brian.
Sir, if you wanted to do something similar on the person, if you wanted to like flip it and say, okay, on the person serializer, I also want to see the profile data. Is there a way to do that? Is it the same, or is it, since it's like a different kind of, one-to-many relationship, or sorry, it's one-to-one, would it be similar?
Yeah, well, you could definitely do something along the same lines. Unfortunately, you wouldn't be able to reference the same person, right? So you could do something like this and then make it run to where it excludes the field for person. And then this way, your person serializer, you can tell it that for the file or the field profile, it should utilize. Oh, I need to name this separately. There we go. And I believe that should work pretty well. Let me go ahead and grab. Oh, I need to exit again. So let me exit, enter the shell, import all of my classes. But now let me grab my person instead.
You're gonna need to import that new serializer you created as well, right?
No, because I'm not going to be utilizing it within this script. I'm utilizing this imported, or I'm utilizing this within the script. Since I'm not going to be using it, I don't need it. Okay, so now I'm going to say, sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was the last command that I ran? All right, so let's do serialize person is equal to the person serializer. And the data that it will receive is person.objects.first. All right, and now let's take a look at the person.data. Exclude field is none and an exclude. Why did I tell it to exclude person? Let's see. Is that where that's coming from? Oh, I put excludes instead of exclude. Okay, so let's run that again. There it is. So now I get back the person, right? Because I'm utilizing my person serializer. Where for profile, it utilizes the person profile, which is up here. That still brings all of the profile except for the person field. And then it gives me the remaining information regarding said person. Does that address your question, Brian?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Of course. All right. There it is. Okay. So now we've covered one-to-one relationships. The next thing that we're going to be covering is a many-to-one relationship. So let's take a look at this slideshow here and see what we have. So we did a one-to-one association. We covered how we can create this and how it works within Django. Well, what about a many-to-one? How does this work? Well, we're going to utilize something called a foreign key relationship. And in this example, we have luggage. We can say that many bags of luggage belongs to one person. All right, when you go and you check in at the airport, you have to check in with your bags. Okay, great. Well, let's take a look at an example of a many-to-one relationship. And let's build it and utilize our shell along with our admin site to reinforce this information. So here we can see a different example where we have many exercises for one workout. So let's go ahead and make the class workout, which will be a models.model. Oh. This workout maybe only has a name attribute. All right. And then we could have a class exercise, which could be models.model. That could have maybe a name attribute. Maybe it has some relationship to equipment, but that would get a little bit out of hand. I don't want to go into that. Let's just say level of intensity. And let's make that a models.positive integer field. All right. And finally, I need to create the connection between many exercises to one workout. Well, I would say that the workout is a models dot foreign key relationship or foreign key. Again, it's going to say, well, to who am I relating to? You're relating to workouts. I have to tell it what to do upon the exercise being deleted or upon the workout being deleted. Well, if the workout is deleted, then this exercise never happened. So I'm going to go ahead and say that on delete, I want you to models.cascade. And then finally, I'm going to pass in a related name field here, where I'm going to say this is going to be a related name of exercise this. Now notice that I pluralized this time. Well, that's because what this is going to do, or whenever we see this, this is no longer a one-to-one relationship. This is a many-to-one. So in workout, if I wanted to see the exercises, I would say exercises, right? It's the many exercises connected to one workout. Good. So there we have our model, and we just made a many-to-one constraint. Does anyone have any questions about how this is working as far as creating many exercises for one workout? All right, doesn't seem like there are any questions, so let's go ahead and move into our next step here. Let's run our server. Oh, actually, I forgot to register these models. So let me go back to the admin site here. Let me import those models. So I'm going to say from many-to-one app dot models import, and I want exercise and a workout. All right. So there it is. My admin site's not working. I should have access to all that information here. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the browser. We can see that now inside of my many-to-one app, I have exercises and workouts. I'm gonna add a workout. Let's say upper body. And it looks like I got a programming error. I wonder where this is coming from. It tells me a relationship to the database where many to one app workout does not exist. And it tells me that the insert into failed. Where could that be coming from? What step did I miss? Go ahead, Tom.
Did we do the migration? Did we make the migrations and make the relation?
Yeah, let's check it out. Well, if I look at my migrations here, I can see that I have no migrations. So that would make sense that I would get that error, right? It tried to insert data into a table that doesn't exist. So let me go ahead and Control C, Python manage.py, make migrations. And let's migrate. Okay. I'm going to run the server one more time. I'm going to go back and I'm going to click save. So now I was actually able to save my workout into my database. Well, now if I go into exercises, I can say bench, level of intensity 1, workout. I wanted to save it to workout object 1. Let's do pull-ups, level of intensity 2, and the workout will still be workout object 1. And let's do one more. Shoulder press, level of intensity, and the workout. So now we have 3 exercises that belong to one workout. Let's make sure that's true. Let's say select all from many to one app. And let's check exercise. Well, there's our 3 exercises that belong to the workout ID of 1. Let's run this again. And rather than exercise, let's check out workout. Well, we only have one workout. And if I wanted to run a join query, I could, but we could see here's our ID and it matches my workout. I see a question here on the chat where it says, why on the admin site, the class models names are pluralized? That's a great question. So they decided that since since you're going to have multiple instances inside of this one framework, it pluralizes them for you to let you know, hey, there's going to be many of them. It's still just taking one, it just pluralizes it to represent that there is many entries inside of each individual field. Does that answer your question, Natalie?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. All right, so now we can see that we have our relationship there. But what about our serializers? How does that work? Well, it's actually not much different from what we had before. Let's make a new file here. Name is serializers.py. And let's say from .models, I want to import my model itself. To save time, I'm going to say import all. Then I'm going to say that from REST framework .serializers, I want to import model serializer. I'm going to make a serializer for my workout or my exercise. Let's say exercise serializer. It's going to be a model serializer. I'm going to give a class meta where the model it will be representing will be the exercise model. And it's going to exclude workout. Now I'm going to make a class for my workout. Where the class meta will represent the model of workout. And the fields that I wanted to cover will be all. Well, I also want to see all of my exercises. So if I take a look at my models, I can see that I have a related name here, exercises. So I'm going to copy that. Go to my serializers and say for exercises, I want you to use the exercise serializer. Good. Well, now let's take a look at the shell and let's see what that looks like. I'm going to say from many to one app dot serializers. I want to import my workout serializer and workout. I just want to see the relationship as to what it looks like within workout. Okay, great. So now I'm going to say workout is equal to the workout serializer. The argument it's going to take in will be the first entry of the table workouts. And now if I run workout.data, I can see that I got an error. Interesting. Let's see. Field get attribute when attempting to get a value for field level of intensity on serializer. The serialized field might be named incorrectly and not match any attribute or key on related manager instance. Huh, let me see what's going on here. On my exercise serializer, it failed to get level of intensity. Well, it has a level of intensity.
Francisco, is it because you didn't specify the fields, you just had exclude in the exercise serializer, or is that proper?
This exclude should work, but I could try having fields and then specifying everything. Let's try that. I wonder what happens if I do all, actually. No, it seems like level of intensity is running into an issue. I'll have to figure out why that is. Let's see. For the time being, I'm going to go ahead and avoid level of intensity. Go ahead, Brian.
Just a shot in the dark, sir, but in that serializer, for the exercises reference, does that have to specify many equals true as you showed us before? Like, hey, if the serializer is taken in multiple, it's not going to return like a list unless we say that.
Yeah, that's a great catch. Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate that. Yeah, I was totally leading us down the wrong path. The reason why I can't find this attribute is because it's trying to find this attribute within a list. Well, I have to specify that this is many equals true. Thank you, Brian. All right, let's go ahead and run this shell one more time. Let's import all of our information. Let's grab our first serializer and enter the data. And there it is. So now we have an ID. We have the key of exercises that show us all the individual objects for the exercises within a list. And then we have the name of upper body. Good catch, Brian. Thank you. All right. Does anyone have any questions over how to serialize data, excuse me, in a many-to-one relationship? All right, I see a question here on the chat. It says, can you explain why there isn't one serializer.py falling within the primary project directory and is falling into multiple individual apps. Are you asking me why didn't I just make one massive serializer file inside at the project level and why I'm dividing this work into each individual app? Is that what that question is asking?
I don't have the question anymore, Francisco.
Oh, okay, perfect. Why would you exclude workout in the exercise serializer? Okay, awesome. So for excluding workout in the exercise serializer, the reason why I'm excluding it is because I don't really want repetitive data, right? It's just going to tell me that the ID that it workout is relating to is 1. That's all it's going to show me. So I don't really need that to be nested in there since I already know the workout is 2, 1. If I had something where I was only querying an individual exercise, then I would probably return this ID so I could relate it and have a way to move back and forth as far as parameters and arguments. But otherwise, I just don't want the repetitive information. Does that answer your question, Natalie?
Yeah, so I guess you're banking on that you will use workout serializer more to show your data.
Exactly. Kind of the Rick and Morty API. If we remember when you queried all characters, it doesn't tell us, I don't know, that would be a bad example. I'll try to think of a better example for that example, but I'm essentially saying this is going to be utilized to display one exercise and all the exercises that belong to this. Oh, sorry, one workout and all the exercises that belong to this one exercise. All right, nice. Of course. Go ahead, Adrian.
Are you able to explain the many is equal to true, the exercise serializer again?
Yeah, definitely. So again, we have a many to one relationship, right? So before we were able to just use one serializer and we didn't have to specify many equals true because we were only returning one object from our database. But in this case, we aren't returning one object from our database. We're returning a list of objects into our database. Into our Python script. So in order for this serializer to work for a list, we have to tell it, hey, you're going to be accepting a list. So we're going to give you a many equals true argument. So what happens under the hood is the serializer iterates through that list and it serializes each individual object. That's what this many equals true argument is doing. Does that answer your question, Adrian?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
And I see a question in the Zoom chat. Is it just because you have only include in the exercise serializer? You haven't specified fields. Oh, this wasn't a question. I think you were trying to help me out debug. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Awesome. So now we've covered our many to one relationship. The last relationship that we have to cover today will be our many to many relationship. So let's get to that. So in our many-to-many relationship, here we have an example where we're saying, hey, the models have a many-to-many field. And in this case, we have many passengers that could be boarding on many planes, right? Maybe you have a connecting flight somewhere, so you have to register all of that information, and everything's just, it gets a little bit jibbled up in this case. Now, before in SQL, we would have a connecting table right in the middle. That would connect this many-to-many relationship. Well, I wonder what happens when I start applying these concepts into Django. And what is it that Django does under the hood for me to be able to manage these many-to-many relationships? Well, let's move over to our many-to-many application over here. And let's take a look at these models. Well, in this case, I have an example of many courses and many students. Well, I'm going to make a class of students that will take in a models.model. And this class of students is going to simply be name. And let's go with age, just to have some other context in there. All right, and then finally, I'm gonna make one for course. Which is going to have a name. And I think that's all we'll do for the course is just name. And now I'm going to actually create this many-to-many relationship. Now, this many-to-many relationship is, I would say, weird or special because it really doesn't matter where it lives, right? This many-to-many relationship is going to get handled from both, regardless of which one of these two models it lives on. And a many-to-many relationship won't allow us to give arguments as to what to do upon deletion, since we don't really know where this deletion is coming from or what it is that it's supposed to happen. It's just going to simply handle it for us and remove it from the database. So let's go ahead and make this many-to-many relationship down here. Let's say students is equal to models dot many-to-many relationship. And let's actually go with the many-to-many field. And here we can say, well, who is it that you want to create this to? I wanted to do it with students, and I could still pass in a related name of courses. All right. So there's my relationships. How exactly is this working? Well, let's go ahead and put these into our file here. We're going to go ahead and import both of these classes. So let's say from many-to-many dot models import, and I want to import courses, and I want to import students. And that should just be student, not students. All right. Great. Well, before I run this into my Python file down here, I want to make sure that I actually make migrations and migrate. So let's exit the shell. Let's make some migrations. We can see here that it's going to create course and it's going to create student. And let's migrate said migrations. Okay, everything is in. It worked correctly. Let me run my server. And let's take a look at my many-to-many relationships. So here's my many-to-many app. Here I have students, and here I have courses. Well, let's add some students. Let's say Francisco, 12. Let's save and add another. Let's go with Adam, 13. Let's save and add another. And finally, Rod will be 21. So we have 4 student objects. Well, what about my courses? Start adding some courses. Well, in my course, let's say I have Python. And I want student 1 and student 3 and student 4 to take Python. All right, now I'm going to make JavaScript. Well, I want student 2 and student 4 to take this class. And finally, let's do C#. And I want student 3, student 2 to take this class. So I have 3 classes and I have 4 students. Well, let's take a look at what's happening within SQL now. I'm going to run a \d. And if we come down here, there's a couple of new things that we didn't have before. So we have our course with the course ID sequential. Here we have our student with the student ID sequential. But notice that there's this table here. This many app course underscore students. Let's select all from there. Well, if I select all from here I have an ID for each one of these instances, and I have a course ID and a student ID. What does this look like?
Is it a junction table?
Yeah, so this is our junction table that we would have had to make manually before when we were utilizing SQL. But now when we utilize Django, by saying, hey, there's going to be a many-to-many relationship, Django under the hood will not only manage this many-to-many relationship for us, but it will also create a separate table that will work as a junction table to create these two connections of many-to-many relationships. All right, it's the wonders of Django. It's doing all that work for us. All right. Well, that's great. What does that look like under the hood? Or what does it look like when I'm working in Python? Let's go into creating some serializers as well, just so that we don't have to bounce back and forth. So let's make some serializers.py. And from here, we're going to say from .models import all. And again, from REST framework .serializers, we'll import model serializer. All right. Well, let's make one for students and let's make one for courses. So let's go ahead and say class students serializer. It's going to take in a model serializer with class meta, where the model it will be representing will be the student. And for fields, let's keep it simple and just do all. We'll make one for the course as well. Where the model it will be covering will be course. And the fields it will cover will also be all. All right, so now we have our models, we have our serializer. What's going on here? Let's say Python, manage py, shell. So there I am within the shell. Let's take a look at the students. So I'm going to go ahead and say from many to many app dot serializers import student course student serializer and course serializer. That worked well. Well, now let's take a look at the first student and the first course. So now if I say student is equal to student.objects.first, that should return my very first one. We can see that it shows me the object of student. If I do stud.name, it shows me the name. If I do stud.age, it shows me the age. And finally, let's check the courses. Well, if I check courses, it gives me a different kind of object that we haven't seen before. Right? It tells me, hey, this is a many-to-many relationship. You can try to access it, but it's going to be a little bit harder. Okay. Well, what if I run index 0? Nope, that didn't work. Well, I wonder what happens if I do dot all. Well, we can see that it runs the many-to-many relationship there. And when it runs the many-to-many relationship, it tries to assess, hey, I'm letting you know this is a model. that I'm holding for you. It's a many-to-many relationship, but you have to query what it is that you want out of there. Right? So this courses or this many-to-many relationship under the hood, it's being interpreted as a set, which is a different data structure that we haven't seen just yet. So a set, it works almost like a list or a tuple. Well, a list because it's able to be manipulated, with the only difference being that you can't have repetitive values within a set. And that's how it's handling this data type for this many-to-many relationship. So in my serializer, if I try to take a look at it now, let's try to take a look at my serializer. Let's grab the course. Let's make that equal to course.objects.first. It returns my course. All right. And if I do course.students, again, it gives me that, hey, this is a many-to-many relationship. You need to actually query. So if I run .all, it tells me all of the students that are inside of this one course. Well, now let's serialize it. Let's say serialized course is equal to a course serializer, where it takes in course as an argument. And let's see the data that is within it. Well, now if I take a look at the data, it gets interpreted as an ID with the name, and in students, it shows me 1, 3, and 4. Okay. That's working great, but it's not necessarily doing what I wanted to do. What if I wanted to see all of the names of my students? Unfortunately, because it is a many-to-many relationship, we can't do something as simple as saying, well, just use the serializer up here and note that it's going to be a many-to-many relationship, or note that you're going to be a many equals true. Instead, Django doesn't provide us the ability to handle this information because there's too many unexpected variables for it to apply. So in order to handle this many-to-many relationship, we'll have to build out a method that can grab each individual object and serialize it the way we want. So let's go ahead and take a break and go into that here shortly. Currently, it is 11:48. Let's come back at 9:58 and cover that information. I'll see everyone back here in 10 minutes. Okay, great. So we just finished off where we created a serializer that will give us some information about our students, but it doesn't actually give us all of the serialized data for students as we had before. Like I mentioned, we can't do something like just saying, hey, use the serializer, but make it many equals true, because it's not going to work. It wouldn't be able to query the data first. It needs to be able to query the data, just like we did here, where we utilize .all to query said data before actually grabbing that information and serializing it the way we want. So we need to do things a little bit different when we make our core serializer. In our core serializer, we want to make sure that for students, we utilize something called a method serializer. So I'm going to go ahead and say students here. And I'm going to make that equal to a method serializer. Here it is, serializer method field. Now the students is going to look for some sort of method that belongs or that lives within the course serializer class that is named def get, and then the name of the attribute that we're trying to get. So in this case, it will be students. So I'll say, hey, for this field, name students, I want you to utilize a serializer method field. And then Django will say, well, which one? Which one is it that you want me to look at? So it looks for methods that follow the naming convention of defining a function or a method, get underscore, and it realizes that all of anything that's named that follows these naming conventions could be used as a serializer method field. Well, then it matches and chooses the correct one by saying, this is the field of students, and this one says get students. So this is the method that you want to utilize for the field of students. All right. Just like everything in OOP, it's going to take in self, but the second attribute will be the instance. So the instance will represent the class that I'm currently utilizing. So now I'll say students is going to be equal to instance dot students dot all, just like I did down here. So students dot all instance references to the instance itself, which is course. All right. So that's going to give me all of my students. And now I can serialize them. If I just want the names of my students, I could just grab the names themselves, and I could grab the age or the IDs if I really wanted to. So I can say for, or let's do some list comprehension here. Let's do serialize students is equal to a list of dictionaries where where ID is equal to x.id, where age is equal to x.age, and name is going to be set to x.name for x in students. And then finally, I'm going to return my serialized students. So we can see we have my class utilizes a serializer method field. So because it's utilizing a serializer method field, it's looking for something that's named get students. We made the method get students on line 18. That takes in two arguments, self, because this is OOP, and the instance that it's working with. We then grab all of the students that belong to said instance, serialize it ourselves, utilizing list comprehension to create a dictionary that would represent each individual query object, and then we return that list of serialized data. So for many-to-many relationships, we have to do it manually. Let's go ahead and take this serializer and put it to the test. We're going to go into the shell. We'll import all of our information. And from there, I'm just going to grab my course, serialize my course, utilizing the course serializer. And now I'm just going to take a look at the data. Well, now my data for students, instead of just saying 1, 3, and 4, actually tells me the student ID, age, and name for each individual student. If I wanted to see all of the courses that this student was in, well, I would just do something pretty similar, right? I would bring it over. I would say for courses, I want you to utilize a serializer method field. And for here, I want you to say get courses. Everything down here is pretty much the same. I'm going to change students for courses. All right, so this is going to grab all of the courses. It will iterate through them. Let me take a look at my model here. All I have is name, so maybe that's all I need. Let's say I want to grab x.name for x and courses and return my serialized courses. Well, let's take a look at that. I'm going to go ahead and exit. enter my Python shell one more time, run my import statement to grab everything. And let's go ahead and take a look at all of our students. So let's say students is equal to student serializer. That takes in students.objects.all. Many is equal to true. Oh, I apologize. It's student.objects.all. There you go. And now I can take a look at students' data. And now we can see that every student for the key of courses has the name of the courses that they are taking. Here we can see the student for ID 2 is taking JavaScript and C#. The student with ID 3 is taking Python and C#. And finally, the student with ID 4 is taking Python and JavaScript. And that is how you handle many-to-many relationships within serialized data. Does anyone have any questions regarding the many-to-many relationships and how serializing that data works? Go ahead, Jens.
So because under the hood, Django is handling making the junction table and the deletions, we don't have to worry about cascades, one, and it doesn't matter, right, which model had the form key.
That's correct. It doesn't matter which one of these models has the table, because the table is happening under the hood.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Will, I think you had a question.
No, you just answered it.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions regarding many-to-many? Landon?
Yeah, I think I was still confused from the question I answered. I thought I got it, but you're making you're making a serializers, you're making changes to it within the many-to-many app. From like the file structure you were going over earlier, you have apps and then you have the project. But within some of the apps, it looks like you're creating more than one model and then building a serializer for that app and then importing that into the project. Why isn't there like a serializer just outside with the project alone and then referencing all the models from all the apps?
I see. I understand your question now. So this folder structure that I have here is purely for demonstrational purposes. If I were doing an actual application that were to reference a class of students and a class of course, I would have a student app and a course app. And then I would define everything that belongs to each individual one of them in their independent apps. Now, as to why are we doing that instead of just putting it all in one central location, since it's going to be somewhat of repetitive code, and it just would make things easier to have everything in one place, is purely a design decision. So the design decision, oh Jesus, I can't speak. The reason why I'm making that design choice is because what I want to do is that if something breaks within this app, or if something breaks in one specific app, only that one app, that one API endpoint, that one location of API views will break. Everything else within my project will still work, especially once my project is deployed. It's very important that my project continues running. If I put all of this information within one file and somebody makes a syntax error in one specific serializer and it gets pushed without somebody noticing, well, now my entire project is down. None of my serializers would get executed because as soon as this file gets imported, it would throw an error. Does that answer your question, Landon?
Yeah, like 95%. I can ask follow-up later. So thank you.
Of course. All right. Okay, awesome. It doesn't seem like there are any other questions. Let's go ahead and continue our slideshow here. We just went over one-to-one fields. we covered many to one fields through foreign key relationships, and we covered many to many relationships through the many to many field. So now let's take a look at how we could take these associations to the next level and what that would look like. So here we have a dining set. Right? We would want an object to represent each one of them. So for example, in this dining set, we have 4 chairs. We have 1 table and we have 1 stool. Well, the dining set table will be the parent of everything. Our stool would have a one-to-one relationship because, as we can see from the the diagram on the left-hand side, every table should only have 1 stool. So that's where this one-to-one relationship comes in the example code to the right-hand side. If we take a look at chairs, well, chairs is a many-to-one relationship because we could have 4 chairs relating to 1 dining set. Now the kitchen is where things get a little weird with a many-to-many relationship. Many tables can belong to many kitchens, right? It could be used between 2 separate kitchens inside of the same household, or it could be used between different owners to travel in between homes and kitchens. All right. And that's how we take our types of associations to the next level. They can all be dynamically intertwined. We took one and sectioned it off at a time for the lecture purposes, but you could definitely have different types of relationships within one specific model. All right, does anyone have any questions over how to apply one-to-one, many-to-many, and many-to-one relationships with your Django models? Okay, awesome. It doesn't, oh, go ahead, Natalie.
Yeah, when you were I cannot say that word, querying, in your Python shell down there, I saw that you put like the many equals true there. Can you show that again?
Definitely.
Because before we did it in like the serializer.
Yeah, so in this case, the reason why I'm passing the many equals true is because it's handling all of my students being returned into the student serializer and not one independent student. I saw you say okay, so I'm gonna take it. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, can I just see the many to many app serializers file, like specifically what you're importing? Because I noticed that when you import to the shell, like I would think you would just be importing student serializer and course serializer, but you're also importing student and course.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the reason why I'm still importing student and course within my shell is because I need to be able to query the database. And in order to query the database, I need to do that through the class or the model itself. I can't do it through the serializer. So that's the reason why I still need to import the student and course so that I could run this .objects.all. Does that answer?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Of course. All right. Any other questions? Okay, it doesn't seem like there are any other questions. I'm gonna leave that question on the chat and store it for later. Oh, sorry. Crystal, did you have a question?
Right. Yeah, just a quick question, and you might already answered this. So the on delete, we only utilize for the foreign key relationships.
On delete gets handled by any relationship other than many to many. Many to many is the only one that does not take the on delete handle. Does that answer your question, Crystal?
Yeah.
Of course. All right. So now that we've learned so much about associations and we learned how to apply them and where they fall, we can go back to our Pokemon app and apply this information. Oh. So I'm going to change directory into my backend. I now know how it works. and I can make some relationships. Well, earlier what we said we wanted to do was go into our move app, and in my moves, I wanted to make a many-to-many relationship. Oh no, let's see, migrations, I did do that. No. Did I migrate it into my database? Let's see. I apologize. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not gonna have to drop the database here. I did migrate it. Okay. Well, let's take it one step at a time and see what happens. All right, so here we have my move. I can see that I have a move app, but there's no relationship between my moves and move app just yet. Well, that's because inside of my models, I want to have a many-to-many relationship to Pokemon. They're living within different apps, so I know that I'm going to need to import Pokemon. So from Pokemon app.models, import Pokemon. And now I can actually implement that information. So how do I go about creating a many-to-many relationship between moves and Pokemon within my move model? Can anybody walk me through that?
What was the relationship you were trying to build?
I want to make a relationship between moves and Pokemon where many Pokemon can know many moves.
You'd
So
create
would we
a
make?
variable
Oh, good.
Pokemon, no?
Say again?
Would you go ahead and create a variable called Pokemon and then create the relationship in that?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do Pokemon. That's going to be equal to models dot many to many field. And it's going to take in a relationship to Pokemon. Now I want to be able to access this relationship from the Pokemon model as well. So what argument or what other attribute could I give this many-to-many relationship on line 25 so that it's accessible through Pokemon itself? Go ahead, Brian.
Would that be like related name moves?
Perfect. So let's do related name, and this would be set to moves. So now they all know, they can all learn the this many-to-many relationship will be enforced between Pokemon and moves. So now let's go ahead and make some migrations. Let's migrate. All right, my migration was successful. And finally, let's go into my serializer and create a way to, and actually let's go into my Pokemon serializer. Pokemon app. Let's create a way to serialize the data for all of the moves that a Pokemon can know. How can I change the serializer to serialize that many-to-many data? Go ahead, Tom.
Is this where we want to use that method serializer?
Yeah.
Import that method serializer and use it.
Let's bring it in. So we bring in the method serializer field. Let's make the name of, I believe it's moves that we gave as a related name, be a serializer method field. And we probably want to add that here, moves, into our required fields. What's next? All right, it's going to be looking for a method. So what would be, go ahead, Adrian. What would be the naming convention for said method?
Be define, ooh, like get to or get something.
Yeah, we want get moves, so get underscore and then the name of the field. We want self and the instance. Okay. Well, now, how do I grab the moves from the instance? Go ahead, Lewis.
Yeah, so you continue like you're doing for the moves, and then you just do like instance dot moves dot all.
Perfect. So I grab the moves attribute of the instance and I query for all of the moves. Great. So now I could serialize moves. And let's go ahead and do some list comprehension here, where I can say the name of said moves. And for now, let's just grab the name. So x.name for x in moves. And finally, we can return the serialized moves. Okay, great. We've made all the changes that we needed to change. We can go over to the admin file that belongs to the move app and register our model. So let's say admin.site.register, move, and let's run the Django admin. All right, so there we have our moves now. We still have all of our Pokemon from before. If I go into moves, I can see I have none. Let's make a couple here. Let's do some Psychic. I think the accuracy for Psychic is 80. You could do it 10 times, and the power is 70. And I Polywag can learn it, and that's pretty much it. But let's, for demonstrational purposes, add it to a couple of others. What are you crying about? Please correct the error. Oh, has the wrong format. Ooh, so it looks like my serializer or my validation here is not working. There it is. 0. No, that would be too many. I don't want 0 or more. Well, I do want to accept 0. This should do a trick. Let me go ahead and run this now. All right, so there we go. We saved Psychic. So Psychic has been saved with the power of 70. Now let's go ahead and do Water Gun or Water Pulse. I think that one has an accuracy of 80. Can be used 15 times. To get 0 or 1, you would use a question mark instead of the star. Thank you so much, DJ. And for power, I believe it's also 80. And this one, let's have Bulbasaur and Poliwag be able to learn it. All right, now I'm just going to go ahead and put in some dummy data at this point. Let's go with 20. And power, I think it's 30 for that one. Let's go with Charizard, Vileplume. Oh. Okay, good. So now I have these 3. Let's take a look at our database, or let's take a look at our shell and see what that looks like when I utilize my serializers now. My Pokemon should be able to display the moves. So let's run into the shell. Let's go into the Pokemon app.serializers. And we want to import Pokemon and Pokemon Serializer. All right, so now let's take a look at all of our Pokemon. So let's do Pokemon Serializer. That takes in Pokemon.objects.all with the many equals true argument because it's taking many inputs. and I just want the data. Okay, so now we can see each individual Pokemon. Currently, we have Pikachu that knows Psychic. We have a Charizard that knows Slap, a Bulbasaur that knows Water Pulse, a Vileplume that knows Psychic and Slap, an Eevee that knows Slap, and a Poliwag that knows Psychic and Water Pulse. All right, and just like that, we made our many-to-many relationship that can actually handle the move data and display it for our Pokemon. I'm gonna fix that real quick on this validations. This should be a question mark, which would accept 0 or 1 rather than 0 or many. Thank you so much, DJ. All right, at this point, does anyone have any questions over how we implemented a many-to-many relationship into our Pokemon or our Poke API project between moves and Pokemon? Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, so in terms of like your file structure, I guess admin can be thought of as like main.jsx, right? Or am I totally off on that?
Are you, so you're talking about this admin.py file and how?
Correct.
I mean, you could, we're not really, I understand you're trying to make a comparison to what's being served on the admin side. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah, you could think about it that way, where it would main just like main.jsx and grab the index of this specific information and then serve each individual registry. But what's actually happening under the hood is this HTML template gets rendered, and then it runs a GET request to our database, asking what models are within our database. Once it grabs those 2 models, it displays them with the apps properly displayed above. And then after that, it runs a query to each individual model for grabbing all, and it sets them in a nice file for us. So there's a pretty elaborate JavaScript file that's actually running in the background of this HTML template to grab all this information. Does that answer?
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions regarding our relationships class this morning? All right, if there aren't any questions, I'm gonna go ahead and answer this question on the chat here. Let me take a second to read it to myself. I see. Okay, so to look at Landon's question, it seems like Landon's question is falling within why would we place serializers within the individual app level rather than placing them at the project level. And I guess this would highlight the fact that most of these apps would have intertwined data, especially if there's relationships in between them. So why would you separate them to each individual app? Well, that's going to have to do with your responses of your API, right? So usually an app correlates to an API endpoint. And that API endpoint would need different sets of formatted data within it. So let's say, for example, we looked at that one-to-one relationship example where we had one profile for one person. We have nested data in between them, but we would want the data to come back in different formats. Right? If I was querying the profile, I would want the profile to have within it the name of the person that it's attached to, along with its ID and maybe some information. But if I was querying the other way around, where I was querying the person itself, well, I would want to see some details about the profile, not necessarily all of it, but the way that the data is formatted or displaying would be different. So that's the reason behind separating them into their independent apps. If one of those serializers breaks, only that one endpoint or that one app would be the one running into the problem and not every other endpoint as well. It's a design decision. You could definitely decide to put them all under one specific file if you would like. But I definitely do not recommend it, especially when you're messing with code bases that have a considerable amount of serializers. Just stick to, keep the concept of anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Does that address your question better, Landon?
It does. Thank you very much.
Of course, no problem. All right, any other questions covering over all the material that we covered this morning? Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. All right. During part 2 of our lecture, we'll be covering what does runserver do whenever we use the command line or in Python manage py runserver, how URL patterns and function-based API views work, what is the request and how it is handled, and URL parameters in Django. So let's get to it. So the first thing we're going to do is what happens when I actually run python manage.py. Well, when I run python manage.py, this script is what gets executed. This main function gets called. We can see that it happens down here. So it's saying, hey, if the name is the same as this file, just call the main function. So when I call python manage.py, it runs this function here. So it tells me to grab the environment where this project is currently set up, try to execute the command line, and let's see if we could find this right here. And we can see that it also takes a system argument. So, okay, so we find that. It tells me the system argument, it passes it down to this manage utility class. Hopefully it doesn't throw me or any further down. Okay, that's a subcommand. Where'd you go? It is going to throw me into a whole loop. I was hoping that we could just find it through these scripts. But there's no magic going on behind this information, right? Like when I run python manage.py, run something, it's not just magically executing code or throwing a server into the web. There's an actual Python script that's nested within other classes or other functions that essentially take that run server argument and say, oh, well, now that we are getting told to run the server, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a Django application where I'm going to run all of these independent apps. Right, so it goes over to my projects. It checks my settings and it looks at all my settings and runs all the independent apps and says, this is where I'm going to host all of my information. And then it needs to find a place where to tie that information. Well, in order to find a place where to tie that information, it captures an argument for what port it is that we wanted to use, or it has a default port for 8000. That script, when executed, will actually tell the machine, hey, I need to borrow this port 8000 within the local host in order to serve these files. And then our server essentially just continuously runs. It's stuck in some sort of while loop, and it's accepting request. When a request is accepted, it then follows a series of commands of what it can do. So if the request is accepted and it's successful, then it's going to try to utilize our URL patterns to actually trigger something. We've seen this during the admin site. When I try to access the admin site, it takes me to the admin site URLs. Let's see here. And in the admin site URLs, we see that they have some URL patterns here for being able to log in. This logout would actually log out my user. And we can see that they're passing a couple of parameters as well. Well, once it goes into that site, it needs to know what function it is that it's going to be able to execute or what it is that it wants to render. And that's where function-based views come in. So let's take this project and start talking about some function-based views or how the server just works in general. Well, let's make a function just like before where it says hello whiskey. I'm just going to name it greeting. And this function is just going to return hello whiskey. That's all this function is doing. Well, how do I tell Django that I wanted to trigger this function in these URL patterns? It's actually a lot easier than we could think. We have this path argument here, and if we take a look at it, it says that the path takes in a pattern, which is a URL pattern, and it's expecting one more argument. It wants to know what view it is supposed to trigger. So from now on, these functions that we create are going to be referenced to as views. And essentially what I want this to do is I want this view to be triggered whenever a URL format is being accepted. So I'm going to name this path hello. And then I'm going to say that the view that I want to trigger is greeting. Now this URL patterns is a list of paths. Currently, we have the admin path already built out. Now I'm simply just adding a path for hello. Well, if I run Python manage, oh, I'm in the wrong directory. Let me fix that real quick. So I'm running Python manage py, run server. This is going to run a separate server. And if I open that up, we'll be able to see that a GET request was sent to HTTP 127.0.0.1.8,000. But I'm getting a page not found, a 404. And I expected to see that. We've seen this before when we did our intro to Flask. Why is this happening? Can anyone walk me through this? Go ahead, David.
Is it because we haven't defined the route that has nothing or no slashes or anything more specific after that? So right now you're just at the port number, but if you put in the port number /admin, it would go to the admin page.
Yeah, exactly. So we haven't established something or a view that would respond to an empty path. So if I go over to my URL and I add hello and I send my request, we can see that it takes we get another error. It's triggering the correct function, but now it's saying, hey, this doesn't take any positional arguments, but it was passed 1. Well, what positional argument could it be that it accepts? Well, this is where Flask and Django start to differ a bit. In Django, even though it's just a function-based view, it is always going to receive the argument of request. And now when I refresh this, we can see that greeting runs a request, right? It's telling me string object has no attribute get. Where is that one coming from? Interesting. It's likely happening because I'm utilizing just a string that I'm returning. And we can't really do that in Django. So in Django, we actually have to establish what kind of response we had. Well, before, when we were working in Flask, we utilized JSONify to make sure that this was a proper response. Well, in Django, we're actually going to go into Django.http, and we're going to import the HTTP response here. So what I'm going to return is an HTTP response with the string hello whiskey. Finally, I refresh it and I actually get hello whiskey. If I go to inspect my browser elements, I can see that my body has hello whiskey within it. I can put plain HTML in here and do something like this. And if I refresh it now, we'll see that it turns into an H1 element. And that's just happening because I'm sending back an HTTP response. Well, awesome. We just created a URL pattern, right? Essentially, here's the breakdown. I send the request to my browser to 127.0.0.1 at port 8000. Well, when that gets accepted by the server then looks into my project, and it goes to my URL patterns because it says, I don't know what to do with this request. I wonder if we have something to handle it. And then it does some pattern matching. It identifies HTTP 001 as its host, but any following information, it needs to find it here in my URL patterns. Well, when it finds hello, it says, all right, well, this is the path that I need to trigger. What is it that I need to do? Well, the second argument tells it that what it needs to do is conduct the function greeting. It's going to accept the request, and it will return an HTTP response of hello whiskey. Does anyone have any questions over that workflow or how Django accepts requests and returns responses? David, your hand's up from earlier, right? Okay.
Yeah, my bad. I forgot to lower it.
No problem. All right. It doesn't seem like there are any questions. So let's take a look at this request. What exactly is inside of request? I'm going to send this information one more time. Well, it tells me that this is a WSGI request that comes in through get for the endpoint of hello. Well, inside of my request, I have something like .body. If I send my request, it tells me that my body has nothing within it. There's nothing within the string. All right. Well, what about headers? What's coming in through headers? Well, in headers, we have a considerable amount of information. We've gone over this a couple of times before, but let's take a look here. So it's telling me the content length of my request has nothing inside of it. The type of request is a text plain. This is the host that's sending the request. Here in the connection, I'm specifying whether I want to keep this connection alive or not. So the handshake happened where they said, hey, can we speak? They said, yeah, we can talk. So because they came up with the HTTP protocol of, hey, we can talk. We have this connection, keep alive. We can look through this, but all this is essentially telling us is all the information from where this request was sent. And if this request has anything that we need to keep track of in order to use. So we have all that information regarding the request. That's great and all, but I still don't have much functionality in here. Let's try to build a different API endpoint or a different endpoint where we can return the square area or the area of a square. So let's do that. Let's do df square. So what's the what would be the, oh man, it's not called a fraction. What's the mathematical operation for returning the area of a square? I think that's the right term.
Length times width.
Yeah. So we have base times width, is that what you said? Let's see.
Yeah, length, same thing, base times width, length times width.
So side times side. Awesome. Yeah. So length times width. So let's say that the square is length, or let's just say this. Let's say square or area is equal to 2 times 2. All right, so this is the square where the side is 2. And all we want to do is return, or honestly, I guess we only need one parameter since it's a square, and then we could just square it. And then we could return the HTTP response of area. So now how do I turn this function here into a view that responds to a URL pattern? We have this example for greeting. What's this example for square missing that greeting has set up for it? Go ahead, Jordan.
You just need to create the URL pattern.
All right, so let's make a URL pattern here. Let's say that this is for square and that it's going to trigger the function square. All right, well, let's try it out. Let's see. Oh, go ahead, Jens.
Do you still have to pass request into Square?
Nice. So now we could pass in request because it's going to accept a request. And now we could actually trigger that function. Well, instead of using this browser and having two screens opened up and over again, I'm going to actually utilize Thunder Client. Well, I can copy my request here, bring it over, and say that what I want to ping is something named square. And now when I send my request, it tells me that what I'm getting is 4. Awesome. Now we have a square. We can maybe apply the square area of a circle. But let's try to make this square argument a little bit dynamic, right? We saw in our lecture for Flask on Friday, this previous Friday, how we could pass parameters to URL patterns. Well, there's got to be a way to do it through Django as well. Well, in Django, we can pass parameters by following the same convention of arrow brackets with one small difference. In Django, by default, the only two types that will be accepted will be integers or strings for arguments. And we have to specify which one of those two it is that we are passing within our URL. So I can say, hey, you're going to accept an integer, and we're going to call this base. Well, now, if I receive this integer base, where is that going to go? How does this square function know about base? Well, it doesn't know until I pass it the argument base and square base. Then it will be able to return my response. So I can say square with a base of 4. Oh, my connection was refused. Sometimes the hot reload doesn't work really well. And there we can see 4 times 4 is 16, and I'm getting my area for a square. If I make it 5, it would return 25. Go ahead, Yams.
Was basic keyword there? Can you name it anything at that point on line 33?
Sorry, could you say that one more time?
Was basic keyword here on line 33? It can't be anything else. And then line 25, say line 23, we put, sorry, not 23, 33, int colon, I don't know, potato. And then we put potato on line 25 and potato on line 26. Would that still work instead of base? Or is base a keyword?
No, that would definitely still work. So we could change this to potato. And if I send my request, it would still work perfectly fine. What wouldn't work is if I named this variable base, and then I told my square function that it was receiving potato. When I send this, it's going to tell me, hey, we got an unexpected keyword base, and we don't know how to handle it. Well, that's because base does not match what I'm telling this function to handle. Now, since they're all sharing the same name, it could handle that request and pass it to the appropriate parameter. Does that answer your question, James?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. All right. So let's do one more example where we can handle a triangle. Can somebody walk me through creating a function that will return the area of a triangle depending on its base and height? Go ahead, Tom.
We could define a function triangle that takes in I guess this one should probably take in like 3 arguments. You'd have to have request and then uh base and height.
Nice.
And then for the area, you do was it base times height and then times 0.5.
I see. So times 0.5. All right. So base times height divided by 2. And then we return, what kind of response would we want to return here?
It'd be a HTTP response again.
Yeah. So now we would return HTTP response of area. Awesome. So now we have a view named triangle that would return the area of a triangle. Well, how do I connect this to a URL pattern? Can anyone walk me through creating a URL pattern that will trigger this view?
Right under line 37, you could add another path. And then parentheses, quotes. And then it would be triangle /. And then the fragment, I think is what it's called. The open bracket and then it would be or int, I think. Yeah, and then colon, it would be base. And then I'm guessing you'd put another / after that. Yep. And then pretty much do the same thing, int, but with height. And then /. And then outside the quotes, comma, and triangle.
All right. Let's see what this does. We're going to go into our request up here. We're going to add triangle. And we're going to say that we want to access 5 and 2. And there it is. So 5 times 2 divided by 2 returns 5.0. Maybe we do this here and 2 divided by 2 just to ensure that we're not always getting a decimal. Oh, did I just break it by doing that? Oh, I forgot to place the 5 and 2. Okay, that still returned a decimal. So be it. All right. And if I did something like 15 and 3, we get 22.5. Good. So everything's working great. The only thing that I would change about this URL parameter is when you're forcing multiple arguments to fall within a URL, I would try to specify these arguments by prefacing with base and prefacing with height. That way, when other people are working with my arguments or working with my API, they understand, hey, I want you to provide me my base. Here's the slash, give me the base. And I want you to provide me the height. Now give me the height. Just a bit of API convention in that case. All right, so now we have created our 2 API endpoints. If I go back over and I say base and height, we can see that it accepts the request and it's able to return it correctly. And now we have 2 well, 3 function-based views. One that will return to hello whiskey at the base path. Oh. There we see hello whiskey. One that will return a square area. For 25. And one that will handle a triangle's area by base and height. All right, so let's do a quick overview of what's going on when the request gets sent. When the request is sent and accepted by the server, it will go over to settings. It will load all of my applications and then look within URLs. In URLs, it will say, well, which URL pattern do I match? And where should I route this request to? Well, it goes and it finds the square URL pattern. And it identifies that it's supposed to take in an argument of an integer. Well, what happens if I try to do an argument of a letter? Well, it tells me there's a problem. There's no URL pattern that could meet or expect letters. It only works if I pass in an integer. So it says, okay, well, this 5 is an integer. It is able to be turned into an integer. So where do I give this number 5 to? Well, then I say, well, then we tell it to look at the view of square, where square expects a request, which is the get request that we're passing into it. And it expects the argument for base, which is the integer that we're passing within the URL. It then squares 5 to turn it into 25 and returns that as an HTTP response. At this point, does anyone have any questions over the Django server and how URL patterns and function-based views work together to return and handle requests? Go ahead, Will.
So basically these functions wouldn't change that much even if you had them outside of the urls.py, right?
Did you say that question one more time?
Like basically these functions wouldn't be different than how they are right now if you had these functions outside the urls.py. Like if you had like a views.py.
That's correct. We're going to be utilizing a separate file to store all of our views later on. But today's goal is to just give us a quick introduction to Django server and how this relationship works. But you're right, they wouldn't change at all. I would just place them in a different file and import them as an import statement, and then call them here within my URL patterns.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
All right, if there aren't any other questions, today we covered creating multiple apps by creating the Move app within our Django Poke API application. We created the app, created a model, validated the data, we made migrations and migrated. We did not test the model due to time constraints, and we went over how to serialize data. We then talked about associations, one-to-one, foreign key, which is a many-to-one, and the many-to-many relationship, and how Django creates a junction table for us within PostgreSQL under the hood. And then finally, we covered serializing the data within those relationships. In part 2, we covered what does runserver do, how URL patterns and function-based API views work, what is a request and how is it handled by the server, and passing URL parameters within Django. At this point, does anyone have any questions over any of the topics that we covered today? Doesn't look like there are any questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.